Okay. Hi, Matt. Welcome. I'm promoting you here to panelist, so you can join us.
Oh, just audio check.
Yep, we can hear you.
On the way.
Great. Going back on mute. Thanks.
Yep. Steve, will you hand me the remote there? That one. Thank you.
Hi, how are you?
Appreciate that.
I'm good. Matt, you're missing pizza.
Hey. Hey.
Where's the pizza from?
Over.
Coburg Pizza.
Right.
Nice.
Oh, good to be on. You cards still. All of our pictures are gone.
I noticed that.
Uh,
I asked when I first started, I was like, we need to.
My framed.
Well, the question was when I first started and we started getting new numbers was we should update everybody's pictures. And then it was COVID, which was challenging. And then there was a sense that people don't actually want their photos taken in general.
I was just joking, because you know, mine was like not a real.
It was a
not-
Facebook one, yeah.
Yeah, we.
Yep.
Looks like Roman. It was, yeah, it was like, you know, like the fake, just like kind of dummy, generic.
Just to automatically set him up
They
there.
put it up.
Yeah, that might be good.
So I refused
That's
to get
where
headshots.
stuff's happening.
No, but it was funny. It was a badge of honor.
I'm fine with the change. But, you know, getting replaced by a whiteboard, I don't know.
We could draw little caricatures of.
There you go.
Funny ones, that'd be good.
Yeah.
Y'all haven't met Paul yet.
Some of you might remember me.
I remember Paul.
You're our auditor?
I'm the auditor. Usually that doesn't bring smiles to people's faces.
Travis, that's where it was at.
I welcome auditors.
Do you?
Yep.
Where are you? Which organization?
Oak Ridge,
Oh, good, okay. Yeah.
we just swapped over.
Hi,
What'd
David.
you get?
I just promoted you to panelist.
You'd asked me that. I don't remember the name of the firm because they're brand new, but
Your finance director used to work for us, only about your former Eric Kaitola.
yeah. Oh, he was with your firm?
He was with Eisler before he left.
Yeah. You know, he's up in Canby now,
Oh,
Hey
is he?
Travis, can you hear me?
finance director.
Yes, I can hear you.
Great, thanks.
But I think he's lobbying to
And I was hoping.
come back down and work on the city of Dean, that's what I heard.
Is he?
Can I get a Wi-Fi password?
Yes, it is golf ball with the capital or ampersand for the A.
Results maybe.
All caps are all lower.
You're making my
Lower.
dollar earning.
G, yeah, so let me, I gotta write it down. I get golf ball, and I think the O is a
Zero.
Oh,
potentially.
O is a zero and the A is an asterisk.
So the A is as the at.
Oh, that's-
Are you comfortable there? I'm actually
I'm
room.
all right.
Okay.
I don't know if that works.
Oh,
That or just ask. What do you, yeah, I just didn't want
Well, maybe.
to disturb Janine here.
Every year,
Yeah. Thank
Oh,
you.
yeah.
every single year.
And he's not gonna-
So what is it again?
I'm gonna go check with Lance, but it's golf ball and the O
How
is
about
a
our-
zero
Right.
and the A is an at.
Okay, is it all lowercase?
Well, that's what I'm not sure. So I'm gonna go check it out.
The smaller.
Alright,
entities
I'm gonna
sometimes
wait.
don't look that at all, obvious.
My bad.
Can I
This is
look
nothing.
at your agenda with you?
So I'm
Yeah,
gonna
it's
move
on the
that.
wall there, but. It's gone.
It's not all lowercase.
I don't think it all is.
I think I did. I usually did. The B is. I had that fine.
I didn't see you use the caps.
And the G is in the D. Oh, usually I just, okay. Could be.
You ready? You're with. Brian, here it goes. Just sent you.
Yes. That worked.
And I
What
don't
is
have your
it?
contact info on my phone, I can share it with you.
Not gonna let me expose it. I used.
Please send it to me.
No, it's golf.
You send it to me.
Yes, it's a capital G and a capital B.
Okay.
Excuse me, what did you say, Travis?
All right here.
A capital G and a capital G?
Yes, that's exactly what it's.
Isn't that crazy?
Better
So
change the
crazy.
password.
I
after
would have
this
never
public
done
meeting.
That's right, that's right. We often, yes.
Follow all ours.
It's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
No,
What's password?
There'll be people in the parking lot, you know. Getting your Wi-Fi.
okay.
I would say greatly appreciate the single file bookmark.
Oh, that was a
Yes.
Susanna suggestion that we do.
I was actually doing that on my own prior to that, yeah.
Yeah, combining them all.
Well-
yeah, into one document.
Well, look at that. I could feel your vibes without even you
Yeah.
guys even knowing it.
I just gotta get my city administrator to catch on.
Oh, there you go. I try to make things as easy as possible for you.
3115 discussion room.
It got a little tedious,
Yeah, so the one.
email or downloading each.
Yeah,
agenda
and we're running, it was kind of one of those, this is the way we've done it forever and always, that's why we're doing it, and then recognizing that, does that actually make sense? Maybe we could just change it. And also from a file retention and saving perspective, that eases things up for us.
Right.
That, in that sense as well, so.
Interesting. All for jail time.
That's my presentation.
Yeah, because usually the file name didn't have the meeting date or
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
Each of those files, just the agenda items.
Actually, I'm right before, actually after.
Okay. Yeah, I remember seeing it. I can't.
I think I'm first thing and then.
I can't remember.
You know, get down the road to the next month.
Yeah, once we get to here, yeah, because I'm gonna do the budget first, and then we're gonna do the audit, and then that's the resolution. So I figured you'd sort of lead through that, because then we get into stuff. that we have something to do. We keep it here.
I'll read the minutes if there is to hold one up. Always read the minutes, that's the most exciting part of an audit.
Just the ordinance on. Where they can.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you get the whole thing loose.
It's just. We're defining what's lawful, unlawful cannabis. So using the same criteria we use for unlawful. We're honoring environmental concerns, so.
Right.
Can't start with any, or can't camp within 100 feet of any water.
Yeah, wetlands.
Wetlands. Yeah, and no roadway, right of ways. Where vehicles travel. And so it's never working.
So Joe, isn't that waterway one written down in the regulations, federal regulations somewhere?
It's with the state issued, this under. It happened based on environmental concerns.
Yeah.
So because of the waterway, Willamette River, and with you guys. Is that downstream is MWMC, we're NEPA's permitted facility. And we test water all the time, people out of violation, it puts the whole place at risk, but environmentally concerned, environmentally speaking. We said, no, within 100 yards of the waterway.
Well, I just thought there was already a regulation with DEQ or something that already said that, no?
That's right, you have the Willamette River Greenway.
Yeah.
Still have, we.
But that's more about development, not of a factory.
No, I know that, but we're using that because it's like, well, if they can't develop within that waterway, then the reason for the development is it makes that environment.
No, and we've done the same thing.
So.
Ready to go, Steve?
Whatever you want.
Recording, good. All right. All right, we're gonna call the Lane Regional Air Protection Agency The board of directors meeting order at 12:15 on Thursday, May 11th at LRAPA. First order of business is adjustments to the agenda. Any directors have adjustments to the agenda? Executive director, any adjustments to the agenda?
No, not this time.
None for me. Public participation, please 3 minutes per speaker. First is comments on an item on today's agenda. Are there any public comments on the agenda items?
We do have some public participants today, so if you are a public participant and you have a comment on the item for today's agenda, as opposed to one that's not on the agenda, please raise your hand and we'll unmute you so you can give your public comment. I don't see any hands going up.
Okay, and we'll move on to comments on a topic not included on today's agenda in the room.
Online, if there's any comments not on the agenda, please use the raise hand feature on Zoom and we will unmute you so you can submit your public comment. I'm not seeing any hands go up.
Okay, we'll move on to comments from board members. Any directors? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge and commend staff for the public hearing and public meeting Tuesday late afternoon on the Baxter permit. I thought you, Travis, and staff did an excellent job. And I think it's good. And there wasn't a public hearing testimony, but I think it was great that provided the opportunity for the public to comment. 'Cause I know there's a lot of concern about the Baxter facility, but I thought you guys did a great job.
Thank you.
Thanks, Howard. Any other comments from board members online? Nothing heard. Next is consent calendar. Do I hear a motion?
Motion approved. Second.
Okay, motion made by Joe, seconded by Mike. There won't be any discussion, so call for a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
None opposed? Okay, motion passes. All right, item 6 is public hearing for adoption of the proposed fiscal year 2024 budget. Before we get to the public hearing, we're going to hear a staff report, I believe. That's the first order, and then have a Q&A.
Yep, so I will share my screen here. And pull up.
Well, he's pulling up the slides, so I'm going to go over some things with you. So the budget committee approved the budget on April 13th. Is that the right date? Yeah, April 13th. That is being presented today. There's no changes from the April 13th meeting. It is an $8.6 million budget that you're approving with a $5.2 million of appropriations for approving the budget. The only change that took place, in which I put a little thing at the end of the budget, kind of a synopsis of the Friday emails and that kind of stuff. The original meeting in March found that the partner fees did not get updated. So when you look at the columns on the budget, you see that changed. Other than that, the budget is the original budget that was presented that you're approving today. There is a change in the appropriation format. So I'm going to walk you through this really quick. This is a change to the format, but it's not a change to the amount that you're approving. The state of Oregon Department of Revenue has strongly suggested that this format be done a few years back. This format helps prevent more having to go back to the boards to get budget revisions, because it's pulling your materials and services, your payroll and your capital outlay to a total. So that means if I spend more in salaries, but not in materials and services, you put it all together, I'm still spending under my spending authority. So this just takes some workload off in the future. It doesn't really change anything for what you're approving and what you will see. So if you go to the next slide, I give you a visual for each one. So on page 19 of your budget, you can see that for the general fund, the total expenditures is the 2.6 million. And you can see in the budget document itself, how much is in materials and services, how much is in payroll, how much is in capital outlay and contingency. And you can see on what the approval is that you're going to sign is that 2.6 million brings those together. Transfers and contingency always is not in an allocated section. So that's why the contingency is down below, because that has a different type of approval. So that's why it's got to be in a different space or a different type, because it's non-allocated, right? So that's for the general fund. Any questions on what you're seeing there?
So is that going to impact transfers between those categories? So typically you can move up to 10% between them and within the same fund. I assume they're still within the same fund, even though we're delineating those amounts.
The transfers for the expenditures are separated, and if there's any change in transfers, we still have to come back to a budget.
No, I mean, as in like, say, between personnel services and materials and services. So if there's any transfers between them, I assume that will take then a supplemental budget or board transfer.
No.
No, okay.
No,
I'm just kind of clarifying.
yeah, no. What it means is I will take the grand total of personnel, materials and services and capital outlay and make sure it's not going over budget. Even if personnel went over budget for the line item, I didn't go over my spending authority because my spending authority is 2.6 million. So in your budget reports, you'll still see it separated. But when you see payroll go over, as long as the grand total doesn't go over, we're okay. So it slows down how many times we'd have to do a budget change.
I assume that was the case. I just
Okay.
wanted to clarify.
No, good question. I thought you meant the amount of transfers. So I'm not going to move any budget. I will never move the budget between those categories. And the real expenses will stay in those real categories. Does that help? Does that answer? So then if you go to the next slide, this one is for Title V. So you can see on page 24 of your budget that the total combined of personnel and materials and services is the 508,000. You see transfer stands alone, and that's what I thought you meant, Mike, because transfer stands alone because it's not in the org unit. If we did have to change that transfer amount, it has to be go through the budget change process.
So any change to even a dollar in the transfer, you have to.
Yes.
So we're trying to confirm you stopped what you said, you're saying you have to do some sort of transfer documentation, right?
A budget change.
A budget change. If we determined that I needed to do $16,000 for transfers for Title V, that has to go through an entire budget approval process. Which if it's over 15%,
So
it only needs to go to the board. If it has to go to the budget committee and everybody, if it's under, it just needs to go to the board. Let me trip over my own words, sorry.
That was like what Mike was saying, is that we could see a supplemental budget report that we would take action on.
Yes, if the transfer amount specifically changed, yes. But not between payroll and materials and services.
appropriation.
Corporations, correct. Thank you.
Right, so we're not gonna be advised if there's transfers between payroll and M&S.
There will never be a transfer between payroll and materials.
It's all within the same fund.
There will never be a transfer between those two funds.
But it will show on the finance report, it would show up, because the finance report goes into more detail than this. Yes.
So, yeah,
And we have our auditor here. I think contingency is the only time the board actually needs to approve from within a fund. Isn't that correct?
From within a fund?
Yeah, so contingency, transferring out of contingency.
Right, out of contingency.
Would be the
board
the
approval.
one time the board would have to approve,
Yeah.
otherwise they can move within the fund.
Right, as Susanna said, the state recommended this years ago. They didn't make it mandatory. But it makes it a lot easier because when we do the audit, appropriations limit's the one that we look at. And now that you gotta buy this, we don't care about materials and services, personal services, capital outlay, that's all rolled up into one number.
And that's always been the case.
so for communication going forward, if payroll is, if personnel is actually over budget, it would be a conversation, you would understand why. But it wouldn't need a budget adjustment as long as materials and services and capital outlay combined did not go higher than the 500,000, for example, that's up there. So you'll see it here on your fiscal, in my fiscal updates.
Understand.
Okay. Then the next slide is for page 26 of your budget. You'll see that for the grant. And you can see that the total of personnel and materials and services is the 1.4. And so what I've did, what you see for what you're approving is the 1.4 million for the grant fund for TAG. And then if you go to the next slide, page 30 is Aerometrics. You can see now Aerometrics has transfers, so it stands by itself because it's not in the org unit. But you can see there that the combination of those there is the grand total. It's still the 583. It's still the same. Because materials and personnel is combined and transfer stands alone. And then we have, this one has a contingency as well for 10,000. And then if you go to the last slide, you can see at the bottom there, the total ending fund balance reserves matches the total. So the 3.3 million is our unappropriated, which is our ending fund balance. And then the 5.2 is our spending authority to give us our $8.6 million budget. And that, oops, that was on page 17 of the budget. Because that's the all combined in the front that you have in your book on page 17. So that is the change in the resolution from the what you've had in prior years. And then last slide, if there's any additional other questions or thoughts.
So these are still going into those LB forms to the state, I assume, right? All the different.
Yeah, and the LB one still gets the breakdown. Yeah, which we're using an old form at the moment, and I'll be updating that to the newer form too. There's a little more detail, but yeah, all of that will still follow the same. So everything is still seen by those categories. It's just your spending authority gets easier, combines it.
I can't find where I saw this, so I could be wrong, and this is maybe not a great place to ask this question, but I felt like I saw in some of the documentation that the state revenue number had gone up, and I was wondering if that was based on any recent information out of the legislature for next year. I thought I saw a change from maybe it was actuals to projected, or but I looked at the packet 2 nights ago and now I don't.
Oh, you're talking in our
remember.
personal budget? Okay, hold on. I mean,
And I don't mean to create a wild goose chase. I know, I just looked there and that looked the same.
Federal, state.
so
That
It's the
didn't-
same.
So I could be wrong, and if that sounded familiar, then you can answer the question, but if that doesn't sound familiar, that we adjusted the state dollars based on new information about state allocations. Does that sound like that's a possibility?
I was looking on page 20 of the budget document.
okay.
Shows it the same.
Okay.
The only
Just
change,
assume that I was looking at this packet way too late at night and then I looked at the wrong number, so.
yeah, because there's no real change for the revenues for the general fund
Okay.
for federal and state money.
And it
Because
wasn't
it's
in the
done
federal-
biannually, my understanding.
Let's see that.
But the partner fees did go up.
Permit fees.
There was Pop 110 that was approved 2 years ago, but I don't know if that could be what you're referring to.
We can move on.
Okay, okay,
I was not prepared to speak to it very well, so.
that's okay.
Clearly, I should have wasted much time.
No, it's okay.
Anything else?
No, that completes my staff report.
Any other questions from staff on this? Yeah,
During our budget meeting, there was quite a bit of conversation in regards to how much to hold in reserves. And it was the comments were that the standard, common standard is a percentage of the budget as opposed to days. And I haven't heard anything back on that. I'd like to be able to make sure we bring that up and have a board discussion on that.
So that is will be presented with 25's budget. I need time to go through and really evaluate each fund and determine what would be a good percentage. And I need time to look at the economic factors that affected the past. And so when I'm hoping to have something come before the board on what my recommendations are going to be that we need to do for our fiscal policies for ending fund balance, hopefully around January, so that that's all hammered out before we start the budget process in March. So that is my goal.
No, that's fine. I just want to make sure it didn't die.
Yeah, no, it didn't. And it's in your little note here at the back about the questions for the things that would reflect in 24's budget. That was one of them, or 25's, excuse me, that was one of them. But I won't forget it. It's on page, well, it's page 43.
Budget.
Behind the budget, go to the very last page. I did a little summary recap of basically the questions.
Oh, got it. Yeah, mine doesn't have a.
Doesn't have a page numbers. Nope, sorry about that.
Right.
I probably added it wrong timing.
And just a quick comment, it's effectively the same thing. I mean, the number of days is just a percentage. Just like a percentage is. I mean, it's the same, it's just saying it a different way. You know, we have 365, so a percentage of that would be the number of days as the same as a percentage of the budget. I mean, it's just a different way of articulating the same thing.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just looking for standardization.
Yeah, and I will. And then I did talk to Paul about the recommendation that he had talked about the 120 days, and he was really talking cash, and he can speak to that.
Yeah, you want me to speak to that? I mean, there's no standard on that, and I've said this for years. I've been doing this
Right.
for 40 years, and it's just my professional judgment. You should have some cash on hand.
Right. No, I'm not saying that there's a specified standard, but just there's more of a common method that's used locally, at least for the cities and stuff. So everybody that deals with different budgets has to deal with different agencies.
Right.
It's makes things a ton easier.
Right. But when Paul was talking, he was talking about cash on hand is not your ending fund balance. So those two, we are a fund-based budget. We're a budget basis by fund accounting for a modified accrual, which I know those are super big words that are only understood for finance people. But the reality is we live in a budget basis world. And our ending fund balance is a budget basis number. How much cash we have to pay stuff, we track differently. And if we were under 120 days in cash, that would be bad. And so I understand what he's saying for the cash. So your ending fund balance rules are going to be based on something different. Each fund has, and even in the cities, each fund has a different rule depending on how they receive their money, right? Like I mentioned before, property tax is based on, they take 5 months of the budget and they want to make sure that reserve has that 5 months because you don't really see your property tax until November. And so and then you plan in your city that any big expenditures that you start after that so that you don't run out of your money, right? And then where your enterprise funds are based on a different percentage based on how you're going for that. And so everyone's different. So I need to do the same thing here and evaluate each fund independently of its own on how its money comes in, how the economy affects its money. I mean, we saw the effects of COVID. I have to look backwards and see what those recessions did. So then I can figure out how do you plan ahead to have enough money for the next recession? Because right now we're within a year out of the next recession, right? Our experts are telling us within at least the next 3 to 4 quarters, we're going to see it. They're not expecting it to be as bad as 2008, but it's still going to come. But what does that mean to us? And what does that translate to each of our individual funds? I need to have that stuff figured out so I can get our reserves high enough that will cover when we're in those economic downturns, that we don't put our funds into red and that we don't have enough to give time to climb out. And so that's what I need time to evaluate. And I want to do that to bring really good facts forward. It's one of my favorite parts of my job is analyzing those numbers and figuring out. And I've done it so much, I'm getting closer and closer. When I predicted for example, the CPI rate for the budget for 23, or for 24 was going to be, I figured it'd be 6%, and it was just over 6%. So I'm getting pretty good at coming out close to the reality, at least for the first year, right? So I need time for all of those things, and I will have lots to share with you, and I will have historical data to back up why I'm looking in this direction. And if Paul wants to add anything to your comp for that, I'm happy to hear from you.
No, not really. As she said, different, your enterprise funds are gonna be different. If you're property tax funded, as most of you probably know, you get your money in November, a little bit in December, and that lasts all year. I will add that what you and I talked about, and Steve talked about, everybody who's property tax funded is facing a real crisis right now because your inflation rate is 6-7%. You can only raise your taxes 3%. So everybody is facing a challenge right now.
Yeah. And then our Title V money, basically, we collect it once a year. So that one really needs to make a difference when we're billing in August, we're billing a year delay. So the COVID effects you didn't see till 21, because in 21 you billed for 20. That's why 20's revenue looked great. And you're like, oh yeah, we're okay. But you're not okay because 21 you started to tank, because when we shut down, all those sources shut down. And then when you do their evaluations, which I'm not the expert what that means, these guys can tell you that. But when you do the evaluation to figure out your permits, you're now doing it on a shutdown economy. And that's why you saw it go woo, because they didn't have it. Now in 23, according to the Oregon economists who build the Oregon state's budgets, the world came back to full functioning somewhere around the later part of 22. So realistically, it's going to be our 24 permits that we're probably going to see the real effect of business back as normal. So even in 23, you're going to see some of that effect. And that has nothing to do with the rate we're charging and all of that stuff, right? That's just talking about the flow of how business works when we're dealing with how we collect our money. And those are the pieces that have to be added in to me figuring out what a good ending fund balance really needs to be. Because Title V is kind of sitting on a crisis position right now with only 45,000 in your ending fund balance. That means one bad hiccup, the fund's in big crisis. So that fund's kind of stretched right now. So hopefully that helps kind of know what I'm going through to get to where I'm going to bring you in the future.
Thank you. Any other questions? David or Matt? No, okay. All
No,
right.
I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
I do wanted a little definition of what that woo word was. I just want to know the intensity of that one. When you said woo, it's going to be tight, I was just like, well, I need a gauge on that one. But thanks.
Thanks.
Well, that's fine. Accounting terms, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's it.
All right.
Definition of it, exactly.
With no more questions, we'll move into the public hearing at 12:38. A chance for the public to wage in to speak to the budget if they have any comments. So I'll open it up for no public in the room, but I'll open up to the public online for any comments.
Yeah, let me
On the
get
public hearing.
there on the agenda here. Oh, that's the auditor report, excuse me. Let me open up the findings. This is number 6. That's the staff report. Oh, we just went to that. Okay. So for those who are online here, our participants, if you would like to submit any comment, raise your hand and we will open up your mic or allow you to open up your mic so you can submit public comment for the budget hearing. Chair Brian, I don't see any hands being raised at this point.
Okay, last chance. We'll close the public hearing at 12:39. And move on to item 7, which is resolution 23-1 to adopting budget, making appropriations for fiscal year 23-24. To start, do I hear a motion? And we'll get into
Can I
discussion.
ask a quick process question.
Yes, sir.
Do we post advertise our public hearing, I assume?
Yes, we
Don't we
do.
usually submit records that we've,
Yes, the-
usually post that we've
The
advertised
affidavit.
in XYZ?
Yeah, so we put that in the Register Guard, and also the public hearing's been on our website since the Budget Committee passed it in April. I'm gonna have to grab that affidavit. I don't have it in my folders here, unfortunately, but yes, I can grab that and we can show that. But we do have that affidavit.
Thank you.
Sure.
And if that's okay, I'll just jump in and move that we adopt resolution 23-01. Second.
Okay, motion made by Mike, seconded by Joe to adopt the resolution. Discussion. All right, nothing heard. Call for a vote, please. You want to go by, can we do a?
Sure, yeah, I guess we'll just go, we'll start with those who are online. Matt, your vote on the adoption of the
Aye.
motion that's on the floor. Aye.
I vote aye.
David,
Aye.
right, in the room, Mike,
I,
Janine, Brian,
Aye.
Howard. Aye. And Joe.
yes.
All right, motion passes unanimously. There's no requirement to read this resolution, is there?
I don't,
Yes, you should have approved it by that resolution. Did you say approved budget and appropriations when you said it? I'm sorry.
I said both.
You said both. Okay, okay. As long as you,
I did when I introduced it.
Yes.
I don't think Mike said it during the motion.
I guess it is resolution, name of the resolution.
okay, okay.
Okay, so we're good?
All right, yeah, we're good.
And we don't
As
need to
long
read
as
it.
it's clear that it was budget and appropriations declined, that's fine.
Okay,
We're good.
all right. We'll move on to item 8, and that's presentation of the audit report fiscal year 21-22. Paul, see if you want to introduce anything or go right over, kick it to Paul.
No, Chair Brian, members of the board, most of you are familiar with Paul.
Yeah.
He's been here before, and so he's got a short presentation to
I
give
did have
you.
a short presentation. I know how much people like listening to auditors. By the way, congratulations on getting one. The way the audit's going right now, you can't find auditors.
Yep.
A lot of governments can't find auditors. We're one of those shops right now. We're not picking up any more clients. It's more overworked as it is, so. If you have an auditor, you probably ought to hang on.
Hold up.
Lock him down.
Yeah, our profession's like every other. We can't find people, and there's a lot of gray hairs like mine in the room that are retiring, and they still can't find people. So,
Or when you hire another one before you get rid of the other ones.
yeah, we have my replacement, my partner replacement's already on board, so.
Planning ahead.
Yeah, he's an audit manager right now, senior manager. We just promoted him, so next step is partner for him.
okay, I'm grabbing your presentation, Paul.
All
I
right.
had it in my folder, but I didn't.
When's your retirement year?
Well, as a partner, I got to give at least 3 years, and I've given more than that. It's not till 2020. So my last 2 years. My last year, I'll probably go to the clients at all. I'll just be supporting the office in the second to last year.
So we technically get you next year as you
Yeah.
hand me off to somebody else.
Yeah.
So for our purposes, the 23 audit will be his last one with us.
You'll have a young guy.
Thank you.
You can just go to the next slide if you
Yeah.
want to.
Okay, let me,
And this might need,
getting this sharing on screen for everyone.
so I'll tell you a joke about accountants while we're doing this. Everybody likes jokes about accountants, right? So a doctor, an engineer, and an accountant were arguing over what is the oldest profession. And the doctor said medicine, God created Eve from Adam's rib. And the engineer said, no, because God created organized chaos. And the accountant said, who do you think created the chaos?
That's cute.
Most people don't understand when we talk amongst each other. I know that. You can just go to the next one, and you might have to hit it several times. I think it brings up each bullet point separately. I think it's 8 times, so. So auditor's responsibilities. Even though we draft the report by auditing standards, that's a non-audit function. So what we're responsible for is every place you see our letterhead in the report. And our front letter says there's no, in our opinion, there's no material misstatements in this audit. What does that mean? It means if somebody were to read this report and make a decision, we're saying there's no errors in there large enough to change that decision. We're not saying there's no errors in there at all. Once I had a client say, once the audit is done, every nickel and dime will be accounted for. We can't afford to pay an auditor, taking out every nickel and dime. It's very expensive. Planning, scope, and timing of the audit, it's better than last year by quite a bit. So it's still not quite, but we've got a great plan set for next year with Susanna. And I'll have to say right now, very impressed with Susanna. I think she's the best person I've worked in that chair in the years I've been doing this. So
Thank you.
very impressed with her work. Significant audit findings. So this year, when we were doing the single audit testing, in my world, I've been doing this for 40 years. Things have changed a lot. Used to be, we could say, yeah, I think that happened, but now if we don't see, in this example, initials say, yeah, I looked at that, that is a finding. And what we found is we selected a sample of 40 items to test, expenses 19. There's no evidence of a certain signature that it was reviewed by that person. Do I think it was reviewed by that person? I'm guessing it probably was, but again, in my world now, there's no evidence of it. We say it didn't happen. So that was the audit finding we had this year. Yeah, it's called a significant deficiency in my world now. I know that raises some eyebrows, but I'll tell you, probably 10 years ago or more, we could call it a reportable condition. Sounds a lot less. But the AICPA, who sets audit standards, says you can't call it that anymore. You have to call it a significant deficiency. What is a definition of a significant deficiency? Anything, in our opinion, that we think you as the governing board needs to know about. That's all it is. That's a lot less than a material weakness, which is a control weakness that we would think would materially affect the financial statements. Actually change the number, that would be material.
You pick your 40, was it expenditures?
Expenditure.
That you just test to see?
Mhm.
Do you know what percentage is that? Is that 10%? Is that 2%? Is that,
Of all expenditures, I don't know what.
I mean, is there a standard?
Well, there is a standard, there's a formula we use, and depends if we rely on controls, I'm gonna get, and don't rely on controls, and
Here comes
what
the
we're
pick.
testing, so it varies greatly. So, well, if we have a population of 40 and we have 19, we're like now, we're just saying there's no sense. Sometimes if it'd be like 1 out of 40, we go, let's go pick a few more because the standard allows you. Well, if it's one incident and doesn't reoccur, you can say, okay, that's one incident. When we're that high of almost 50%, we're not going to expand our testing.
Was one of the test cases the EPA ag grant?
All of it was related to the EPA. tag
Okay,
grant,
good.
Actually,
Yeah, so that, you know, EPA has their own
right.
auditing that can be
All
aggressive.
is related to EPA tag. grant.
Okay.
So
And that's what I was gonna say, doesn't the single audit trigger, more in-depth scrutiny? Because our agencies now had two
Yeah,
single
yeah,
audits. in a
single-
row. And let me tell you, they have poured through much more
Yeah.
documentation.
and we do your audit, right?
No, we have Miller, you, the.
Okay. You're not, I thought you were from Cottage Grove, but you're not.
I am.
Okay.
Not the city up, you're
No,
right, city up.
we do
is-
the city,
is- Yes. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, single audit. If you want to know, I can tell you about it, but if you don't want to know, you're going to be subject to it for quite some time. It looks like, as long as you have tag. You spend more than $750,000 in federal money, you're subject to a single audit.
So who is the designated federal audit agency? Is it EPA or LRAPA?
I don't know if you have one. When we fill out the harvester form, we say, you don't have an oversight. Let's
Okay.
say.
I don't know if there's some minimum threshold, if there's.
No, there's usually is a minimum
Cognizant
threshold.
audit agency.
And in my opinion, I mean, I've audited a lot of places where I've had findings. And most of the places I audit, the federal government didn't even care about, quite frankly. They might look at your report, they might not, but I've had bigger findings than this. And I would say, you might get a letter from the federal government, just. After some training I went to, if you're LA with the kind of dollars you're talking about, they might be interested.
Yeah, my firm was large, so that.
Yeah.
So the single audit trigger, is it from a single source, or if you had two federal sources, It went over 750. Would that trigger a single audit?
All federal expenditures over 750. Reason it's called a single audit. When I was around when they passed the act, back in, I've been doing this for 40 years, back in 1983. Because before that, the federal government sent auditors out. Each group, APA, somebody else, Department of Health. Then they said, well, we'll have the CPAs do this work and we won't have to send people out every year. And they kept called it the Single Audit Act because there's one audit formed by the CPA.
Yeah. Okay.
But I added a lot of, for example, in the regular audit, I have some professional judgment. In the single audit, if you don't file one form, and I had this case, even though the federal government reimbursed the money, the correct form wasn't correctly filled out. Even though I had emails saying it's all fine, that's a fine.
Are these posted on the federal clearinghouse as well?
This, we haven't posted it yet, but it will be posted on the federal clearinghouse, yes. Difficulties in counting during the audit. We'll hear a lot sooner than I was last year, so it is improving. And again, we have a plan. We'll be here in September and we're shooting for the November.
Yes, we already have on the calendar to start the audit process for 23's audit. By the 18th of September, we will have a completed trial balance that we will be touching to make more work for Paul, because we shouldn't be touching the trial balance as we hand it to you. And then he'll be on site that week of September 25th to do the testing for internal controls. And he will be doing the fraud questions to all staff this year instead of a selected amount. I asked him to increase that so that everyone's on board with what that looks like and what that means, since I've made changes to internal controls and been teaching on what internal controls actually mean here to the management team as well as the finance team. So
The only caveat
Very
I'll
good.
have is what we said in our meeting. I've been auditing companies that have made conversion. That's assuming everything goes well in conversion. If the conversion doesn't go well, I could change a bunch of things. But you're going to Cassell,
yes,
who about 20 years ago offered me a job once to work for them. So
great company.
yeah, it's a good company, good software. Corrected, uncorrected misstatements. We had, as Susanna pointed out, multiple trial balances. That's how that happens. We're doing an audit and we say, oh, wait a minute. I don't remember if it was yours, but for example, your bank reconciliation says your cash should be this, but your trial balance says this, and then they give us a new trial balance. And we have multiple of those. But we got, I don't think that'll happen this year. No significant disagreements with management. And as far as I know, management didn't consult any auditors relating to audit issues.
Nope.
So, next slide, please. Oregon minimum standards. So, you might not know this, but there's several bullet points here too. The state of Oregon and the state of New Jersey, the only two states you can't pump your own gas in. It's also the only two states that have specific auditing standards related to governments. So I don't know if there's a correlation there.
It's kind of funny though.
That's kind of funny.
Follow the money.
Yeah, I've audited governments in California, Oregon, Idaho, and Nevada. And those other three states, any CPA could be a government auditor, whereas here you have to have certain CPE, you have to maintain an Oregon municipal audit license, which I think is a lot better standard than just letting anybody give an audit. And in testing that, deposit of public funds, probably most of you are aware, you can put your money in any bank not just banks, we changed this a couple of years ago, bank or credit union you want to, as long as it doesn't exceed $250,000. After that, that financial institution has to be on a list that the state treasurer puts out.
And they guarantee the funds.
And they guarantee the funds, yes. And I was at a tribal client this last week. I don't know, kind of trivial. Tribes cannot put money into LJP.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
Yeah, I did the work for Cow Creek Tribe and I was down there talking to them. It's like, we just put a bunch of money in LJP. I didn't know you guys could do it. Budget testing, we go through and make sure you publish it. So you're talking about the affidavit and publication. That's one thing we test in the audit process, whether that was properly done. I make sure the budget math correctly and everything balances. Insurance, the state law requires us as accountants to look at your certificate of insurance. And it's kind of a judgment call. If, I like to say, if I look at your certificate of insurance and you only had $100,000 worth of insurance, I'd probably get excited, but I've never had a finding in that. Investment in public funds, you just put your money into LJP, so you do that. There's certain things you can invest in, but there are a lot of laws around what you can and can't invest in as the local government. And public contract bidding, we select a sample. You're asking about sample size. In our industry, if it's a sample, if it's a population, so a total number that we're looking at, we call that the population. Is less 250 or less, we can do 10%. Since you don't put out more than 250 bids during the year, we have to do 10% of the bids, but we got to round up. We can't round down. So if you put out 2 bids, we're looking at 1. So any questions?
On public bidding, what's the threshold the agency has on being able to do sole source procurement?
I don't know that. I'd have to look that. I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay,
but I'd
just
have to
curious.
look.
Talking about that, because
Yeah, we did, right.
you told me I didn't have it.
25.
We didn't have it, and then our policy is
That's
35.
Yeah, so 35.
That's what I'm remembering,
Right.
25K, does that sound right?
That's but you say the policy is 35?
I thought our policy was
There's
35.
different thresholds,
Yeah.
at different levels.
Right.
You know, RFQ versus.
Right.
You know, the whole, yeah, there's, and those change from time to time with.
They
the
do
different
change.
circulars that come out.
So
I just don't know if you have a specific one. If not, you're subject to the state statute.
Okay, I was just curious.
single, and you said single, for a single service, we didn't,
Sole source, yeah.
sole source didn't have.
And you can
Have a
declare an
threshold.
emergency if you really need to. I mean, there's 2 ways to do that. So
Well, does LRAPA have their own public contracting?
I don't.
He's asking the question because of the bid from Jensen Strategies.
Mhm.
And I had talked to Paul about it before I went to get the bid, and he said we didn't have to go to open bid because it was a single person that we're looking at, and it's under the threshold, and the
For the
threshold
state-
is
for the
generally
state regulation.
35,000 anyway. So it's all under, we don't have to go to a formal public bid of any kind
Yeah.
to get a sole source person to do a job. It doesn't mean we can't go ask for more, to go find some people to give us more
Right.
bids, but we don't have to go through a formal bidding RFP or anything like that. We don't have to do an RFP.
Do you have to do a formal justification?
The board would have to have yes, you have to have a justification for that. But you can put that in your board
I was
minutes.
gonna say, if there's like only one contractor.
Contractor,
that does a
right,
certain
that's
type of
right,
good,
right.
You can, also do that as well.
Just as long as it makes sense. I mean,
Yeah, we had that issue with TAG when we had to go to bid. We got one person to apply to the open bid. And we can justify that it's in an area that is difficult to find contractors, and so we can justify to use that one bidder. So yeah, we have all that documentation. Be ready to go for 23's audit to show why we didn't take it out again and why we accepted the one bid we did get. So yes. It's different when you're talking about a contract services, the other bids for actually doing different types of construction and that kind of stuff. Those all have different,
Those are
Right.
lower threshold.
they have a whole different level of responsibilities.
I think our procurement policy is like 10 pages at my agency. It's huge.
really,
Yeah,
Yeah.
well,
that's on my to-do list to update our fiscal policies too. That's one of my to-do lists too, because I think they've been growing dust.
any questions? There are some slides after this, but Susanna was gonna show those with you later. Budget, thank you, reminding me of the budget violation.
Okay. Because you talked about the budget.
Budget, yes, we did test your budget violation. This is how many years since you've had a violation? 4 or 5? So what happened, as Susanna was talking about, we test on the, and I mentioned we test on the appropriation level and the
You want them all there, right there.
Title V fund went over in personal services. And so did the tag. fund.
And that's on page,
That's on page
22 of
22 of the
your
audit report. So what happens with that? You've already written a corrective action plan in the state.
yeah, they're gonna approve
But
it.
usually the state will send you a letter if they pull your report. My experience is that every county, I've done some county auditing quite a bit, gets selected. A lot of the bigger governments than the smaller governments are kind of a random. You might not ever get your report pulled, but Suzanne is being proactive.
So knowing that Title V is in such a kind of precarious position, if we're gonna go over in the future, how do you do that without triggering a budget violation? Like what would have been the appropriate process to take that wouldn't have gotten a red flag from you?
Transfer. funds.
Budget, change the methodology of how the budget's being written.
That's
Number
gonna help.
one, is gonna help. Number two, so my plan going forward, then this is in the resolution we're gonna talk about. One, I'm changing how the budget's built, and I'm gonna be increasing the salary. So normally, I get into the weeds of when I build a budget. So I would take the salaries and actually roll them up, so that I am one step ahead of what everyone's really gonna make, even with their merit raises and the COLA, so that I'm prepared for staffing leaving unexpectedly. Because when a staff member leaves the agency, they take with them their buyouts. That will always tank a personnel budget and personnel's. And if you budget your personnel too tight, you're not leaving room for someone to leave, and that can push you over budget. So I'm changing that style, so to be ready for that. The second piece that's being added is I will be meeting the department heads on a monthly basis, and we will be looking at their budget to actuals together. And I will project out how I think it will end at the year. And we're going to talk about what's going on and what the anticipation should be to see if we're going to get there. And that way, if there looks like we're going to have an issue, I can bring the budget back for revision sooner than at the end of the year. So we stay on top of that, because it's just a budget change
Yeah.
is all it is, because this, and you've had this finding since 2019. If you go back and look, this has been the same audit findings all these years. So those are the steps that I'm going to do. Go ahead, Howard.
Well, with respect to Title V, since that's supposed to be a standalone fund, that is the revenues for that is money collected by the permittees. And so the expenditures also has to be fenced, if you will, only for the Title V program. The Title V program goes over budget, say that staff time is taking a lot longer on a permit than you anticipated. Is it appropriate that you can transfer general revenue funds over to a Title V program? I mean, so
Even as a line.
so what do you do? So what do you do?
So you couldn't go the other way. You couldn't go from Title V because those dollars are restricted. The general fund dollars are not restricted.
Well,
Chair Brian, members of the board, under the Clean Air Act, Title V funds have to be first off, has to be a self-funded program. It cannot be from other funding sources, but that's one of the requirements for states to have delegation of the program.
So, but if you do not have any reserve dollars, which I believe I looked at and saw we have zero reserve dollars, what are you going to do to make that fund balance?
So when we went over. I mean, isn't that the whole?
One appropriation.
So what do we do? That's kind of.
that's where I was going.
Okay, we're all asking the same question.
So so to do that, so if I find, as the steps I just talked about, so I determined that the budget was inaccurate. I have to change the revenue and the expenditure for TAG specifically in order to balance that budget to a budget. That's what I would have to do. So with a resolution would change revenue and would change expenditures.
But you can't change revenue because those are dictated by the state as to what you can charge.
So you're mixing things up.
Set by the
So
legislature.
No, I'm not. I'm saying that the revenues are from the Title V permittee.
okay, we're
Those
talking.
fees, well, I was talking about
Okay,
Title V
so
program.
okay, well, let's stick with one fund at a time.
Well, I wasn't talking about TAG. I was talking about Title V programs
Okay.
specifically.
You're talking about
So-
TAG though, right?
Title V.
Okay, well, okay.
So
Sorry about that. So okay. Sorry, you guys are throwing so many questions and I'm not hearing what fund we're talking about. So because every one of our fund has a different rule. So Title V, the contingency dollars that you have sitting there, that's what the contingency dollar is for. So if I'm going to make a budget revision for Title V, I'm going to take it from the contingency dollars.
In a transfer from the board before June 30th.
And I will reduce the contingency and I will increase the expense And that will keep our budget balanced. And that's how I would do Title V.
Mhm.
So there's no touching revenue. I thought you were talking about TAG, so I apologize. Doesn't have a contingency. So, sorry, I should have asked, what fund are we talking about? So that's how I have to do it. And that's why you have a contingency in your budget. That contingency says to me that you're giving me, which I think Title V, you gave us $10,000. I have $10,000 that if we find out that we need an additional expense that we weren't prepared for, that I can bring that budget back to the board or the budget committee, both, depending on how big that number is, and get a budget revision for that contingency and move that out of contingency and move it to the expense necessary. Am I explaining it right, Paul?
Yeah,
Okay.
there's a contingency in Title V. I'm just curious. I don't have a copy of the audit report. What was the actual in Title V this year? It decreased fund balance some more, didn't it?
Yeah, I think to zero.
Yes.
I think it was like 40 some odd thousand.
Oh, was it? Okay, I'm sorry.
The Title V was 41,700 over in personnel, and TAG was over $2,090.
So,
I don't want to belabor this, but
That's okay.
I guess that with respect to Title V, if there is inadequate contingency and you go over budget, and you're not going to get any more revenue, because those, you get what you get from the state based on the permittees. Do you have a plan of action as to how you're going to deal with that? You still have work to do, but you don't have any
So
budget left to do the work.
we would be looking at materials and services and see if we're gonna go over there and we reduce the materials and service line. So right now I'm planning to bring the budget back to you in June.
The material and services of the Title V budget. Okay.
We'd have to evaluate and see where we're at. And then we would reduce if that expense. And if there wasn't enough Title V to cover the shortage,
So what happens if you don't have any budget left in Title V program?
then we take an audit hit. And then then we're in trouble. Why we
as
need.
long as
to
your Title V fund balance.
So I think Chair Howard, I think what you're trying to ask is. Everybody knows what's going on at the state level with DEQ running out of money for their Title V funds. It's a $10 million program and they were $8 million short last year. So in essence, what they're having to do is not fill positions. They're having to change allocations of how the Title V money is used. And because the amount of money that can be charged to the regulated community, in this case, the industry, that rate is set by the legislature, not by EQC or anyone else.
Right.
That is a slow process and it takes time to pull that off. And right now, that's still being talked about in the Joint Ways and Means Subcommittee at this point. It's actually Senator Dembrow trying to talk to both sides of the table, if you will, to come to a place that they can both agree that's going to be different than the ask that was part of House Bill 3229, which was asking for an 80 and a 3% increase in 2 subsequent years, part of the biennium.
Right.
That has not been yet decided. So if we were in the same same situation currently as DEQ, we'd be faced with reallocation questions and being able to do Title V work. That's the short of it.
Okay.
And the comment that was made earlier is correct for most funds, even though they're restricted. You can move money from the general fund, but it sounds like the EPA Clean Air Act restricts that for
Correct.
Title V, which I wasn't not aware
I
of.
wasn't either.
Yeah.
So, but if a fund goes negative,
Well, it sounds like
What's the-
Title V, you can't
You can't do it.
do
You'd
it.
have to put your employees in some other department.
Yeah, you'd have to move your employees.
And that's exactly what DEQ's done.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm sorry to belabor, but I just really needed to understand what.
So instead of doing Title V permitting, those permit writers are doing ACDP permits.
Right.
Is- One more question, not to belabor the belaboring. But is that why on the budget resolution, there is no contingency for Title V because you're not allowed to have one? Or was there just no money to make a contingency? Because I'm seeing 0 here.
I believe it's the
And it
latter.
feels very precarious, given where we are, to have 0 contingency there. So is that intentional or just required?
so
or-
I didn't write the budget. I would have put the contingency in there regardless and would have just reduced my ending fund balance. Because you need the contingency for oopsies that come up. So you can totally have a contingency in there. There's no rule it doesn't. I don't know why it's not in there.
Budget
I
law
didn't
rules
write
the
it.
budget and EPA rules actual expenditures, so.
I kind of wish we had this before we adopted the budget. Honestly,
Well,
I think I would.
at this point, because of the timing that I came in the door and the timing of the budget, if you would have had to make big changes way back in the beginning, because if the board makes a bigger than a 10% change, we have to start all over again
Yeah.
from the budget committee. So
Yeah.
for you approving it already, there's no room because the way we meet to address that. That should have been addressed in March. But the reality with me barely coming in and all of the things on my plate with the conversion to Cassell and all that, there wasn't a deep dive. So we just got to kind of live with this budget. Know that I'm probably going to have to bring it back for a budget change regardless. Anyway, FY 24's budget will more than likely have a budget change. I'm just going to say that now. And we just move forward. And that gives me time to have more budget quarter, some sort of, I want bigger updates with you on what's really happening than the consent agenda. I will actually want to take some time and actually have the conversation and talk in more detail about it so that the budget and the actuals conversations are more frequent to help with these questions today. Because I love that all of you are passionate about this company, this organization, and your questions. They're great. I love them. But I also want time to help you. And I'm as I listen to all your questions, that's helping me develop what I want my quarterlies to look like for you so that you can understand what's happening. And that will be an improvement going forward. So so that helps. And the state audit finding that we have does not require a board resolution. It just requires a letter from me to them. But I still have to tell you what the letter is. But I decided for transparency, I would bring that all the way to the resolution level and talk in detail about all the changes that I am making to how we manage funds here and the process that we're doing and put it on the resolution so that I'm hiring the information that's coming to you guys to help, right? That was my goal. Because I think transparency is important. So I don't mind. I will, as the future goes forward, I will do extra steps. So sometimes if we have a budget change and Oregon budget law says I don't need the budget committee, I might just pull the budget committee in anyway, because that gives them time to understand why those changes were there. It gives them more knowledge to be ready for when the budget comes. So just depending on what goes forward, I may add that regardless. Because it really does help. That more we talk about budget and understanding what budget means versus actuals versus the rules of how the money is spent, like Howard brought up. As we have those discussions more, those areas won't be so cloudy for you. And I'm hoping that will help going forward. Because a budget is a budget, right? And then the reality of what we end up doing is different. And how we devise the budget number is based on all the rules on how we get our money and what we're allowed to do with it. So we really are talking about a lot of different things all in one setting. That's why I got confused with your questions. I didn't know where you were going because there are so many different factors involved in the end story, right? I hope that helps.
Manager work.
Any other questions? To the auditor?
What, Howard?
Any more from the auditor, right?
Do you have anything to add to that, Paul?
I would
going
just say,
forward?
from my perspective, if it goes, to me, my more concerning thing is you don't have enough money to fund what Title V does. I mean, the budget's the budget, and if you violate budget, you violate budget, but that's not as significant as you might not get enough money to actually fund what you've been doing with Title V. That's a little bit more of a significant issue.
That's even above our pay grade.
But we're at risk though. And as the board is, you are responsible for the budget. And that's why I want to increase what I give to you. But if it goes into the negative, you guys approve it. So that, and I was just asking Paul, what happens if a fund actually goes negative?
They have funds that have deficits. That's an Oregon minimum audit standard finding. It is. So I don't know how you can with Title V. It sounds like it's gotta be self-funding, so
Yeah,
Well,
how do you, I don't,
that's right.
is it possible? I'd have to do a little more research. to find out.
yeah, because I've never seen a government fund go negative before, because usually, well, it's not my watch, but I'm always, trying to help not that happen, but Title V is in crisis, so whatever happens at the legislature is really hanging on the wings on what harder conversations we could be having with Title V. going
Usually the
forward.
solution to fund going negative is a transfer or loan from a
Right.
fund that's
Right.
got health.
Right.
Right,
EPA doesn't allow you to do
And
that.
that's what I'm saying, we'll just transfer some
Yeah.
money, so.
so
I didn't realize.
There's
our general,
Stop work.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
That's about what it sounds
So
like.
That's
we
right.
need to approve a resolution at this point for the
Yes,
corrective
after this-
action plan
After this,
after.
after we get past this conversation.
Yes.
I
I'd like
was
to do
trying
it now if we
to, I
could.
was trying to, that's what I was.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah.
And I'd like to thank the finance director. I know she got thrown into the breach this year, but I think you've done a great job to get us back on step. So we'll move on to item 9, which is resolution 23-2 to approve audit finding corrective actions. Steve, anything to introduce, or should we move right into the motion?
Nothing to add. There are several parts to the document.
Yeah. All right, can I hear a motion on number 9?
I move approval of resolution 23-1.
Second, two. Bring it down to that.
Sorry.
Yeah. I was looking at this. Okay, motion made by Howard, seconded by Joe on that. Any discussion? And I think I heard you say it, but there is a letter that goes to the Secretary of State about the corrective actions. What
this
our
whole
plan
resolution,
will go.
the whole resolution has to go,
Okay,
yeah, and to the federal, is there a resolution to the federal too for the?
No, yeah, well, we have that, you signed that document's already in the Fed, in the audit.
Clear, see.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's already in the audit report.
all right.
So I'll just say that makes you. And this really doesn't matter to you, but don't, so if you see it next year on your audit report, you're now a high risk auditee for the federal single audit testing. What does that mean? It means instead of tasting 20% of your federal funds spent, now we gotta test 40%. But that's not hard to do here because tag is. It's gonna be more than anything else anyway, so it
Test
doesn't
tag,
mean
test
anything.
it, you're
But
committed.
next year you'll be called a high risk auditee and that lasts for 2 years. And if you have no more findings, it goes away.
All right.
Motion in a second.
Yep, any
A vote.
discussion?
Just need a vote.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Yeah, just give me a call.
Got an eye up there. Okay, any opposed? All right, motion passes.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
See you next year.
Paul,
Yeah.
we'll see you next time.
Well, yeah. In November, you won't, you're going off the board.
I'm dropping off.
The next year Cody will be with me and
You're
he's
gonna
the guy.
replace me with someone young.
That's what's happening to me.
it's gonna happen to me too.
All right, moving on to item 10, Citizen Advisory Committee. Is Jim online?
Jim is here. So Jim, I just selected to promote you to a panelist. So if you can accept that, and then we'll be happy to hear from you.
Matt, we're away.
Okay, takes a minute. Sorry.
Dropped. Wi-Fi.
Okay. Ready?
Already, Jim.
Okay, so the first thing we talked about was the recruitment for the committee. Our bylaws call for a committee membership of 7 to 15 with some specific seats. So currently we lack an agricultural representative, and we've lost our member of the public. So I've been hoping that we could get the ag rep for sure. And also would like to see if we could get the word out there for other people to apply who would be interested. So that we're not quite so close to that 7-seat limit. And Travis has reached out to KLCC to inquire if they'd be interested in doing a public service announcement to that effect. And then after that, we picked up the discussions about a public survey to be on the website, and we're moving through that process. That pretty well covers it, unless you have any specific questions.
Questions of Jim, the directors?
Who was the member of the public who dropped off?
Terry Richardson.
Oh, okay.
We still have other members of the public, but
Okay.
it's always good to have more members. of the
Sure.
public.
Thanks so much, Jim, for the report.
You're welcome.
Right, and moving on to item 11, which is the dashboard report. Yes, Steve.
Chair Brian, members of the board, this is the dashboard that we normally do in April and October. So we delayed it 1 month to get it to this point in May. So I can run through each of the categories. You're familiar with the document itself. So what you'll see in the document is that the new updated language is in a different color than the rest of the document. So under Clean Air Act goals on the first page of the 6-page document, you've got meeting the ozone standard with all the monitoring that we do to stay below the 70 parts per million standard. So that one's in good shape. Moving on to the next one there. Maintain compliance with the annual PM 2.5 air quality standard. Page 1. That standard is currently 12 micrograms per cubic meter, and EPA is proposing tightening that standard. And they took some comments beginning in January to somewhere between 8 to 11 micrograms per cubic meter. They're really leaning more towards the 9 to 10 micrograms per cubic meter. All that really means is that depending on where they arrive at the standard, we're going to have to work very much more harder to get show that we're meeting the standard, and make us have to go through more exceptional event scenarios where we have to submit that information to EPA to get that approved. So you can discount things like wildfires. Moving on to the next one is the 24-hour PM 2.5 and PM 10 standard, which is currently at the 35 micrograms per cubic meter. On January 6th, EPA proposed that they're going to leave that standard alone, which we're thinking they may, but they're taking comments to as low as 25 micrograms per cubic meter. And what's in the ballast there as well is Oak Ridge PM 2.5, PM 10 redesignation and maintenance plans were published in the Federal Register a while back last year in August. So we're able to show that we're in attainment for the current standard for both the annual and for the hourly or daily. And so we're hoping that all of that work is going to still keep us in compliance with the NAAQS. So I'm ready to move on to the next page. Under Clean Air Act goal for the targeted airshed grant. What you see there is for the first category there, complete the work to get the state implementation plan approved, which we did. Continuation from the previous goal for the Oak Ridge PM 2.5 and PM 10. So that work has already been done and is completed. So again, it's got the green status. On the next one there on the page there, continued development of the Oak Ridge Air Targeted Airshed Grant. All the work that you see there, we're in the 5th cohort of homes to look at all of the qualifications and the enrolling homes in the program, initial home energy audits, all of those items listed there. That's the totals of the work that's being done using the monies that's been appropriated through that TAG grant. We also have regular meetings with Oak Ridge Air Partners, including EPA on the work progress. And because of the effects of COVID and availability of contractors, the TAG 1 grant, I believe it is scheduled to be from when it was originally awarded a 5-year grant. We may have to ask for an extension beyond the 2024 expiration because the work got slowed because of COVID and availability of contractors. Other than that, if the work's progressing like it should. Moving on to the next page, the priorities for the air toxics, Clean Air Oregon. And we continue to do our program regulation rules and fee structures for area sources and for the national emission standards for hazardous air pollutants or NESHAPs. So this is an ongoing thing that we do to include any new developments by EPA in permits when they need to be renewed to make sure they have the latest requirements inserted into them. So we're doing well doing that. And then we also do the long-term trend air toxics monitoring. We have the West Eugene site, and we were able to work out a deal a while back with DEQ and some of the money that we have to actually have 2 air toxics monitors when normally we'd only have 1. So there's still the West Eugene monitoring site going on for air toxics. And so little more than a year ago, we rotated the portable site, the portable version of the air toxic site, moved it from the where it was over in Eugene up to Oak Ridge, and it's been there ever since. And we plan on moving that one. The plan is to try to move that, relocate that to in 2024 in the city of Springfield. Difficulty has been, and so you know, is finding a host site that will allow us to put that site, set that monitoring site up. Even some of the schools and some of the parks, we're having a hard time getting permission to do that.
Are there data yet, air toxics data from the Oak Ridge?
There is.
Is that available or is it been published on the site or anything?
We have it. I can send that to you. It hasn't been published on our website just yet. But the air toxics data from 2022, we got quite a bit of information. We did share it at our Oak Ridge Air Report. The benzene was much higher than expected from the wildfire smoke. We have a grant that we filed with the EPA that will get Lane County Public Health and Oregon Health Authority to essentially look at, here's the monitoring that occurred during the 2022 wildfires. Lane County Public Health is going to try to get all payers, all claims data. So like anytime an insurance company spent money, that's the all payers, all claims data to see if there's any compare contrast. And then OHA is going to use it's ASTR, I forget exactly what it stands for, funding to assess
Toxic substances use registry.
There you go. Yeah. They're going to use funding for that to look at, make an assessment of that air toxics data. But it is available and we can send that to you if you have it.
Okay. So the timing of that was great when we moved that monitor there before the last wildfire season, because we captured all of that event in the monitoring that we did.
You have a preferred geographical area of Springfield for a site.
Yes, so Lance Giles, I'm not sure if he's available to help talk about, but we're trying to locate closer to some of the larger sources that we regulate. And so we're kind of favoring either the Thurston area or over there towards the Gateway area, where we're trying to monitor. And if Lance, if there's anything else you want to add to that, go ahead and
Just in general, I think is what
there he
would be
is.
the information I would need.
Lance can describe where he's trying to look and where he's having.
You got any room on your property there? Councilman?
On where?
At your home?
On my house, no. It's in the tree, you don't want it.
Go ahead, Lance.
So if I understand right, Commissioner, Joe, you want to kind of have an explanation of where we're looking to put the site? Is that it?
No, I don't need a long explanation. I just need a short list of preferred spots, 1, 2, and 3, and then I can work from there.
Yeah, we have a list of criteria that we kind of use, population, if there's sources close by. And one of the areas that kind of pops up is the Gateway area. It's close to the freeway. There's people that live there. And so our first try was to reach out to the Springfield Public Schools to see if we could use the youth farm property there. It's got a lot of open space, but
really what I need, Lance, what I really need is you have 3 preferred 1, 2, and 3 spots. What are the requirements for the amount of land you need? And is there any cost to potential property owner that would be associated to it, or LRAPA is going to cover the entire cost, including security? That's all I need.
Okay, well, I can get that to you. Sure.
Yeah, how you get there is totally up to you, bud. So send me 3 top spots and I'll do what I can.
Great. I'll do that.
Okay. Moving on the Clean Air Oregon program, which is the next priority. The program's been around since November 2019. Just as an update for the sources that we have called into the program, we've done level 1 risk assessments for J.H. Baxter's remaining emissions, and that public hearing occurred 2 days ago, and that requirements of that risk assessment have been incorporated into that permit that was issued or about to be issued. And then the Seneca Sustainable Energy and the Willamette Valley Company have had their risk assessments also done in 2022. And then Inwood Forest Products, number 1, Clean Air Oregon emissions inventory has been approved by LRAPA. in April. And so we're doing some modeling protocol and soon be able to incorporate those requirements into their permit. So there's where we are with the sources that we've worked on so far.
For the benefit of like a member of the public, I understand these are like very data intensive. There's lots of different criteria, materials that you're looking at. From a practical perspective, what's changing for the sources that have come in terms of their regulatory requirements or testing requirements? So are you still in the process of just understanding the risk and then you develop the kind of strategy, or they meet a certain risk level and then nothing changes? I guess I'm just trying to understand the implications, right? Because it's a significant investment.
So it's a combination of both of those. What also takes time is for the facility who's never had to try to quantify these emissions before, trying to find ways to actually accurately do that. And then be able to model those to find out what the risk is. And if Max is available, he can kind of tell you what has been inserted into some of these permits that we've just issued. Sometimes it's been minimal, sometimes it's been more.
Yeah, and we don't have to do that at this point, maybe that's a future conversation to have, maybe an annual deeper dive into Cleaner Air Oregon and kind of what the implications are once there's a body of work where we could say, nothing's really changed, but we know what we've done the risk assessment and that facility is operating as it should, and we don't need to do anything differently. There's maybe a middle ground, and then there's like, and I'm just throwing it out there. I feel like we should have a better sense of what the implications are for all this work that we're doing.
Well, there's 600 different.
Enormous
That we'll look at
number.
rather than the criteria pollutants or the 188 apps that EPA has administered through the year. So the universe is much larger than one.
Absolutely. I think as a member of the public, what you want to know is that we're not just doing all these analytics and it's not changing anything, right? Like just making all these industries and your staff review all this work feels like an administrative and kind of process burden. And I think I feel better to know that having gone through all this, we've learned something about what our air quality is like, that this is, there's something beneficial to the program.
We could compare a separate meeting to talk about that.
Absolutely. I probably won't be there for it. So maybe I'll listen in.
So then the next priority on the dashboard here is maintaining self-supporting operation at break even or better production levels. This is the metrics that we're talking about here. And to get to your point that you made last board meeting, Janine, you wanted to know what we're doing to try to have improvements to marketing. There's some things listed here in the language. Parametrics was not immune to the effects of COVID. The global economic growth has been slow to recover at the pre-pandemic levels. And the sampler sales are still feeling the effects of that, believe it or not. And then while distributors in some countries are facing recessions, distributors in other countries are experiencing growth. So we're just trying to trace that down and take advantage of where that occurs. So our efforts are focused on the countries with a stronger economic forecast right now. And then we're also trying to build that distribution network in those countries. The new Metrics website is now live. We're thinking that maybe it would help attract new business as well. In addition, the long-term goals being considered include licensing of our existing air samplers to expand the product line and working with the designers to create new equipment. So there's what we're trying to do. It's a slow go because we don't have R&D people on staff.
I guess I can't remember when we had presentation on aerometrics. I guess it was maybe last year sometime, October. So it'd be good sometime next few months to maybe bring aerometrics back in and give us kind of a update.
So last time we gave a report on a business plan, we said we were going to do that on an annual basis.
Right.
So we're going to do that again with Trinidad that came last time and helped us do that. So yeah, we're planning on doing that.
Okay, thank you.
One more question on aerometrics. I believe in the budget, there's some money for R&D. Was that correct? Was there any money set aside for marketing? So I'm glad there's a new website, but a website is a passive entity, right? Like no one doesn't drive traffic to your website unless you have a marketing plan to do that. So I'm wondering if it's now that the website's updated, there may be a good time to try to do some even digital marketing to get
So,
traffic driven to
so
that.
Trinidad can speak to that.
He's here.
And he's here if necessary, but he's got some ideas that we've been kicking around, try to be able to do just that. And
If you would like, Trinidad is here as a panelist, so if you want to go into that, we
it's up to
can.
you. If you want to hear from
I
Trinidad
don't
right
want
now.
to derail the rest of the board's meeting. Just
I think
maybe at the
getting an
point
update
that.
soon.
Next update or before.
Trinidad, you're off the hook.
Okay, so then on goals and initiatives, I'm on page 5 of the dashboard report. So, you know, we do this report twice a year, that October, and now we update it as accordingly, and we use the priorities that that the agency has to try to show how well we're doing. You see most of these in the dashboard report are green and a few yellow. So from an ongoing timely permits, inspections, and constructions perspective, the ongoing permitting inspections to be completed in the next federal fiscal year from a backlog perspective, we are much improved on the Title V backlog. We're actually down to 2 Title Vs yet to be issued out of our total of 14. We are going to gain a couple more Title V facilities up to 17 in the foreseeable future. So at the same time, we're taking care of our backlog and ACDP permits as well. And you can see those numbers right there. Our inspection requirements to meet EPA's compliance monitoring strategy is on track, like it has been every year, to meet the goal by September 30th. And we, to EPA's liking, the 20% or less backlog in Title V was met by the end of December. An improved compliance and inspection reporting and tracking perspective for that goal and initiative, we are working with LCOG to expand the development of our customized database called Linfo. And the first phase was put into place back in May of 2020. And then they went live. And so Linfo now accommodates tracking data and information related to permitting sources. And we worked with LCOG to successfully add facility inspections into Linfo in 2021. And so we're ready now to test phase 1 of that for the new compliance module as well. As of May, this month, we have a complaint report to pull data from in Linfo, whereas before we didn't have the ability to do that. And we're working to migrate historic older data into the complaints record so we can pull farther back in time. Phase 2 is to include RLID, so we can get more information about locations of property. And that phase, once phase 1 has been tested and installed, we'll hopefully move on to phase 2. So we're trying to slowly build this. My understanding, we use LCOG staff to help us build this and make changes to it as we need to. So it's a slower process than what most would be comfortable with, but it's something we actually need. And then lastly, I'm on the last page of the dashboard report. So again, we do rule changes to keep pace, not only with EPA requirements, but also keep pace with any changes DEQ makes. So just so you know, there were some rules that EQC adopted in November of 2022. Those DEQ rules, when it became effective March 1st, so we're going to have to follow very closely behind that. We'll be bringing you guys a packet to approve so we can take those new rule changes that we have to incorporate into ours to the EQC afterwards, after you have your approval. We're also looking to update some other rules for asbestos to make them clear and make some improvements to those rules as well. So that's just a heads up that you'll be seeing that in the foreseeable future within the next year. Maintain financial stability and viability of LRAPA. So we're getting back into some of the budget concerns here for the last 3 that you have shown here. Susanna's also just told you that the 5-year financial forecast is being redeveloped and will be presented to the board during the fiscal year 25 budget, which is our next budget cycle. We're maintaining a full staff of 19 FTEs. Right now we have no vacancies. And then we have already discussed a little bit about the financial reserve requirements at 120 calendar day minimum. And what that actually means, reserves of ending fund balance rather than just cash. And I will say, related to the Title V discussion we had earlier, and the budget planning is still going on at the state level. The May 17th is the revenue projection that could allow some of that discussions to move forward at the state level, which could eventually affect what comes to LRAPA. And I'll stop there, because that's the end of the dashboard report.
Can I ask a question? I know we were talking about I don't remember if it was a Senate bill or House bill about the Title V funds. Do we have any update on where that's at, or
Yes.
has there been any amendments that would, have mitigated some of our concerns, but yet still?
So I can give you a snapshot, because I had that discussion yesterday with DEQ. It's House Bill 3229 that's in the Joint Ways and Means Subcommittee right now, has yet to make it to the full committee. What's at play right now is deciding on what the fee increase can be. I mentioned before, it's the 80 and 3% over a biennium. What's being proposed right now is 43 and 40. But it has not met any approvals yet. At the same time, with the May 17th looming large next week, hopefully the DEQ budget will have a work session within the next couple of weeks to be able to discuss not only what is going to be the final outcome of House Bill 3229, but what monies are available from other funds to feed their budget, which there's some other general fund monies at play that not only can DEQ receive, but also LRAPA once that is complete. So that's where that is. It's a lot of unknowns, but a lot of discussions going on behind in the committees.
Thanks, Steve. Any other questions about the dashboard? Okay, we'll move on next to discuss process for director's performance review. I believe we have Mary Bridget online to briefly discuss that. Yes. Mary Bridget, over to you.
Hello, LRAPA board. I'm here today to lead a quick discussion on the process for the annual performance evaluation for your executive director, Steve Dietrich. And Steve and I talked a little bit this morning just to prep for this item. So I think we can get through this relatively quickly. I don't have any written materials for you today, but I have a series of questions. And then I think from that information, we'll have a plan that we can put together for you. So obviously, annual performance evaluations are a common part of managing employees. And Steve, as the executive director, is your employee. He had a performance evaluation last July. So we're sort of looking in to aim in at that same time frame. But I do know you will have some board turnover. So if we could just parking lot the issue of timing for a minute, but if you want to try and aim for June or July, if you want to think about that during our discussion, I'm happy to adjust the time for however that works. I wanted to start first with talking about the 360 evaluation, which is just another way to say to get feedback from Steve's employees at LRAPA. I have a copy of a 2019 version that was done when Merlin was still the executive director. It's about 7 questions. It has to do with working at LRAPA. And it looks like it was done like kind of with the Survey Monkey or an email format. So I just wanted to confirm that the board would want to move forward with a similar process for Steve's evaluation this year. It's pretty generic, but it does give the employees an opportunity to kind of mark and rate, and then they can do some general comments as well. So I don't know if the board has any feedback about that, but I'd be happy to chat about that more.
Any concerns on the board, Dave?
It's the right way to go.
Okay.
Sounds good,
So
Mary Bridget.
Great. So I think we can get that. We'll use the same one as before. We could probably get that out a week from now and have that out for a few weeks, and then have a report for the board for an upcoming executive session for his performance evaluation. Does July work for the performance evaluation, or would the board like a different time?
July, everyone?
Got a quick question. Mary B, can I have a quick question, please?
Sure.
I would love to be able to, it seems like it makes sense for people that are outgoing off this board that have had experience with Steve, be able to have an opportunity to make sure we don't get ahead of them, get behind them leaving.
Mhm.
So I assume that's what you're referring to, is trying to make sure that we get input from them before they go off and do their merry thing.
Yeah, it's up to you. Sometimes I've seen boards want to get something done or they're okay with the new members, but I know you're dealing with some vacancies. So just bringing that up for your perspective, whatever you want to do.
He said we could still do it in July, but just get an input from Janine.
Yeah, or, yeah, I
If she's-
think there's some
someone-
others that are leaving, so. But
I
if you
think
wanted
if
to,
that were to work, I mean, we would need in June, I think we would probably want you to have your self-evaluation presented in June so that I would have something to respond to, and it would just be, I think, fairly informal, because it would be after I would score.
well, if you're still willing to do it along our timelines, and that'd be great too.
Well, I can't do it in any official capacity, right? Because I won't.
Well,
be
we
on the
can have
board.
anybody in
You're a
executive session.
stakeholder. You'd be a stakeholder, right?
And
should
do
be-
that to-
What do you think, Mary B?
What's that? Have then former member Parisi at the July meeting?
Yeah, we can invite anybody. to
Or get her
executive session
input
if you want.
on
At least get her
the
input.
evaluation.
Evaluation.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
She's no longer a board member?
I think that would be, in this case, I think you could do that. Yeah.
Is that okay with you?
I don't know if she wants to do that.
I never saw one. I thought you were done. He's like, wait a second, do I have any input here?
Steve like planned to, this July timeframe all around this, so, we're really messing up his schedule here. If I have something to react to by June, I would try to turn around and have some input before the end of my term.
Howard,
Yeah, who will send out the survey to staff, and who compiles that?
Mary Bridget.
Mary,
I
okay,
Third party.
okay, thank you.
Which is great, because that
Yeah.
provides the confidentiality that we
Yes.
couldn't do. when
Right,
it was
it's all
just-
protected under law.
Yeah.
Client. Yep.
So I think that's better for staff.
I think
So that
so.
was part of our discussion.
Yeah, thank you for being willing to do that.
Very
Oh,
much
sure,
so.
no problem.
I do have a question.
Steve.
For purposes of giving me some more direction, and so I'm clear to try to make the June board meeting with that information. Travis, if you can put up the document that was used last year, because there are some board members on the board that never saw that yet.
Right.
So that I can see if we're still gonna try to use that same format or something else. Because what I have is a long list of accomplishments that haven't been inserted into this document yet, and I may find that it may be difficult to insert all the accomplishments into the current document, which is this one right here, which I was asked to crosswalk last year between agency goals and accomplishments and how the board would be. There's a total of 12 goals here that were, some of them are still valid, some of them have been completed. In other words, it needs to be updated going forward, but for the purposes of this exercise, this is what we have to look at as far as the document that was used last year.
We didn't use the performance management agreement that we've used in the past last year.
Nope, we use this.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's weird. I thought we used that last year as well.
Feel like I responded to it.
I do too. So we have a form which would give us a 1 to 5, I believe it was, rating on, what was it, 5 categories or? I'm trying to remember.
So it's executive session, I ran through this document. But I mean, that was our your evaluation of him, but he's got what he's talking about, what he's providing to us.
But
Oh,
he
it
filled
could
out
be
the,
anything.
Yeah, that's what he used right there.
Right.
And I,
Okay,
and as far as that document you're talking about, I don't think I've ever seen that.
okay.
And maybe you probably wouldn't, it would just be your evaluation.
well, no, I
I think
fill
it
those
has-
out and I send those in, and
Yeah.
those are a matter of record, I believe, because it's a formal performance evaluation. I emailed you mine last year.
Yeah.
Because we didn't see each other in person, so I just signed it and emailed it in.
And I don't keep those, so I wouldn't have
No,
I have
that.
to look, but
I'm for just, that's fine, but I think we should just go and look from today forward.
Well, I guess the question though, and this is a question for Mary Bridget, is, isn't it my understanding that you need to approve your form for the evaluation before you actually do that? That's typically what we do in Cottage Grove, is the month before, we'll say, do we want any changes to the form? And then we approve that, and then,
I don't think that's required. With the state of Springfield, I know that if we do any changes or significant changes or different methods, and it's brought up for the council leadership. Myself and Sean,
but isn't that presented to the full council before you go in executive session to do your
No, they
evaluation?
get the forms, but what's on the form typically is not gone to work session.
Any feedback?
Do you recall? Yeah, Mary Bridget, do you recall?
I think it depends. So I think when we're talking about the first item, the 360 out to staff, that probably could go without specific board approval, but it's up to the board if they want to see it. If there is a board evaluation that gets filled out by all the board members and compiled, and that sounds like that's what you're talking about?
Correct.
Okay, that I think you'd want board buy-in on that if there were to be changes for it. And then the third document, it sounds like, is what would be kind of like a self-evaluation, which would be what Steve would produce as part of his assessment of his performance for the year. And then when the board and Steve meet in executive session, then they kind of have three sections, right? The 360, what staff thinks, the self-assessment that Steve has done, and then the board's assessment. That's what is that typically, does that sound like a good path or what you've done before?
Yes,
like it.
yes.
So last year, we didn't do a 360.
No.
Right.
And the forms you're talking about, I don't recall seeing those. And then in the executive session, I showed you the document that we went over. So that's all I remember.
Do any of the existing board members happen to have an older copy of that board assessment that they could send to me?
Janine just pulled it up.
Ah,
She
great.
can, she can send it to you.
Yeah, just email
I'll
it.
forward it to you and Steve, because this is what I sent to you last April
Okay.
of 2022.
And for Steve's purposes, I think we just remove the stuff that's already been accomplished, as you mentioned,
Right.
and then just leave what's ever remaining in
What's
there.
still pending.
The goals are still pending, and can you do it that way?
Are
That
the
makes
5
sense.
categories that were on, can you go back to those 5 categories? I just want to
Sure.
make sure
Yeah.
that performance agreements are the same. So it should be strengthen community partnerships and improve. I mean, I think we're looking at the same thing, but just maybe in 2 different formats.
Oh, okay.
Nope.
I'm saying this does not look like.
I can provide.
This was the third iteration of me trying to come up with what you guys wanted last
Where'd the
year.
goals come from?
I made them up myself.
Oh, okay.
Which is totally fine.
And totally fine. for
Yeah,
feedback.
absolutely.
Yeah, but we're looking at what forms are we gonna fill out with the areas that we feel are important to review you on. And so we had come up with this, maybe 8 years ago or something.
And I did that in October. And what I was told is to do something like this.
Wow.
Oh, and this is fine for you.
Yeah, this is fine.
Work.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'd say modify it, get rid of the stuff that's been done, and or maybe mention it, the fact that you did get it done.
Executive summary of what was
Yeah.
accomplished from the last one.
Yep.
These are what we're still working on, and this is what we're gonna be looking at in the future.
And I think what Janine and I are talking about is the forms that the board members are gonna fill
Right.
out. You
Okay.
know, as part of the process
Oh.
of our evaluation
Okay.
in these 5 areas that we find, was it 5?
Yeah.
Oh, I actually remember the right number, so yeah. So-
Well, I think what's strange to me is that in fairness to Steve, I believe what we've done in the past is that when we did the performance evaluation, we would do that and then the director would give us the goals for the next year, so you have something to match against, because otherwise he's got his accomplishments, we have our categories, and what if they're not the same? It's not fair to evaluate somebody on
Right.
different metrics, right? So we're a little late in the process this time, but it feels like we should be syncing. And if you're able to provide something in June that has your whatever 5 or 8 areas and your accomplishments, I would say that if those were your goals for the year and you're reporting on your goals, that's what we should be evaluating on. Hopefully, they're not radically different, right?
Yeah.
And if they aren't, then we need to change the process so that we're in alignment of what we're evaluating Steve on. So he's clear
Right.
what the basis of the evaluation is. Otherwise, it feels like, you know, we're not synced up, and we need to be synced up. This is important. So I'm hoping that's not the case. And then Mary Bridget, I have this form, but it was Steve's evaluation. I just want to make sure it's okay for me to send that to you because it's my evaluation of Steve from last year.
Yeah,
But
just mark it as confidential. That'd be great.
Thank you. I just don't want to, and that's okay with you, right? Okay. I didn't say anything wrong.
Okay, Mary Bridget, other
Yes.
questions?
Yes,
I
I,
don't remember doing that.
can I, why don't I repeat back what I think my direction is? And I,
Okay.
because I think I might be off and then you can correct me. Does that work?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I will, through my office, send the 360 evaluation to staff next week based on the 2019 version with the same questions. So that will happen. That's the 360. Steve will work on his self-assessment for the board to review. And the part where I'm needing help is, should he send that to all of you so then you do your board assessment with that material in hand? Or is that what you're saying?
That's normally what,
Yeah.
like Steve would give us that document in June, and then we would have that month to review that, do our evaluations.
From our
And then
perspective.
they're in executive session in July. We would use his material and then we would hand those forms in, so they're a matter of record.
Perfect. Okay, so then Steve will work on the self-assessment kind of now, with the idea that in June, this board will have the results of the 360, his self-assessment. You'll have time to absorb those documents. You do a written board assessment, and maybe those can be sent to my office and I'll compile them like the 360.
Yes.
Okay.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
And then you have the executive session in July.
Yeah,
Right. That's perfect, Mary
sounds
Bridget.
beautiful to
Yeah.
me.
Okay,
Sounds clean. Steve, you good on your?
piece of cake.
Yeah, I think I'm using the form that you can send me.
Not for your self-evaluation. You're
Oh.
gonna
Yeah.
use
If
what
you want, it's up
What-
to you.
okay.
You can look at it and see if
Okay.
it works for you. I think it really,
Okay,
I'm just not sure that the goals that were on that, because that's from 8 years ago, are gonna align with
Oh.
what you have been using for your goals. So
okay.
Well, and we've used
But you
them
can
each
still
of
use-
those 8 years. I mean,
Yeah.
we have, but if they need to
they
adjust it,
could,
we need
yeah,
to.
you could certainly modify the form and plug in your
Okay.
goals, right? And we can still use.
This just sounds like
form.
the form that you presented is more sort of a functional thing,
Yes.
whereas Steve's is
Yeah.
probably more of a technical.
Management or staff, or,
Yeah,
you know, these
yeah.
are more operational.
Yeah.
Operational.
Yeah, so, but I
I'll
don't.
know it went to the form. I don't want anyone,
Oh,
I have
no.
nothing to do with the
The
form.
form's
I
fine,
just-
but I think we can
just wanted to have a
yeah.
copy.
We can take what Steve's, and I think Steve's form is good because it shows what his goals were and how,
Yeah.
and what were achieved and what he's still working on. And we can, from that, we can derive how those
Yeah.
functional areas
And if
are.
there's any mismatches, we can work on that.
There we go.
Okay.
Pretty decent for you, Mary B.
Works for me, and if you guys are good, I'm good.
Thanks very much.
Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you.
Great, thank you, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you tomorrow.
All right, it's about 2:00.
So the records report, probably a good thing that we don't go through it unless you have questions, because I think we're a little short of time.
Explanatory.
It
It's
is.
a good dashboard, but yeah.
But I do want to make sure you know that in this one and the one prior to, there's a whole lot of public engagement going on about LRAPA, and I know we'd be remiss not to mention it, but we had to pick another time to maybe revisit all of the extraordinary work that's being done by staff out in the communities, either self-directed or in part of other community meetings, and all the work that we're doing out there. We're even going to schools and doing presentations now too. So it's a lot of good stuff to mention that you probably don't even know about.
Can you roll that into the next director's report?
We can do that.
So
Mike.
one quick question, if that's okay. I'm noticing a lot of asbestos
Right.
violations. Is that something we're doing differently to catch them, or is that just that there happen to be a lot of violations right now?
I think it's part of the trade itself. I think it's also, we've got a pretty astute inspector, and believe it or not, people calling in complaints.
Okay,
So we're getting leads wherever we get them, and we go find violations, and that's what we're doing.
thank you.
So back to the communications thing, what NWMC does is we do a communications report on a fairly regular basis during our board meetings or commission meetings. And those actually are very well received by the commission. But it was just a short briefing by our communication staff from NWMC and saying, okay, this is what we've done since the last meeting, and this is how many contacts we get. what in public meeting, et cetera, et cetera. Just a real executive summary of what they've got, and that opens the door for any commissioner questions. But that works
Yeah,
well.
so we,
That's kind of in the director's
It is,
report. We
right.
We just don't have time to get.
In the director's report every month, there's kind of that summary, what's happened last month, but yes.
We do it quarterly.
Yeah.
Which is plenty for us. I mean, seems like that.
But there has been a lot, like not only stuff that I've done, but we've had staff going out giving asbestos presentations. We've had permitting staff for giving presentations in technical, industry related environments. And I think all of those are, there's been a lot of that over the last, like, I'd say 6 months or so.
Just a summary report every quarter is super.
Some of that's gonna show up in my evaluation, by the way.
It should, which it should.
All right, anything else on the director's report? Okay. Full business, anything?
I have something. So just following up, where did we ever land with the contract for? the
Jensen
bylaws,
Strategies?
The stuff,
We're having a meeting afterwards to kind of
okay,
go through
you guys,
that.
okay,
Yeah,
It's ongoing, it sounds like.
yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
thank you. I was just curious where.
And it'll be on June's board meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Agenda.
New business, anything, Steve?
No. If I could, so I've been at the request of Steve. He asked me to kind of jot down some action items that came out of this. So I just want to go through those to make sure that
Yes.
we're not missing anything and then make sure that we have things kind of. So what I have written down, and this is not in a particular order, just in my notes, we'll get air toxics data to Howard. And then, of course, that will be published on our air toxics webpage and updated, which we haven't quite happened that yet. Get a list of sites for air toxic locations in Springfield to Joe, so he can help make some magic there. Get a CAO revisit on an upcoming agenda at some point, which Janine asked for. And then when we have our air metrics discussion, have some reference to marketing in that discussion and presentation. What we just went through with Steve, putting his kind of self-assessment to the board and having that ready to go by June. And that is all the things that I caught for action items, if there's anything that was missed out of that.
That's really just a discussion in regards to legal representation for LRAPA that may be worth discussing. You know, as far as Mary B and maybe using 30.
Yeah, the thought was that Mary Bridget would take care of this evaluation business.
right.
And then because of the sometimes conflicts of interest she has, we would
Right.
start transitioning all the other work to
And that has already started.
That-
Kristen Denmark.
yes, Chris.
Right.
Yeah,
But would that not be a board?
it's
topic?
not, it's not really written down anywhere, unfortunately. It has, I know that most cities, you do hire the administrator, you do hire the lawyer. But in this case, there's nothing written that says the board hires the attorney.
Right, which is why part of the
Yeah.
discussion, which is that in the bylaws, should not be discussed as to.
Sure, yes, in the bylaws, we will incorporate reference to that with that decision, whatever that is.
Right, that's all I'm saying. I think it's wise for us to do that transition, whatnot, but I think there should be, other than okay, let's use this outfit.
Right.
It seems like it should be more informed, or at least involve more of the board, so that way everybody's on board.
Yeah, and we can get a board consensus as we write the bylaw.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, and on kind of enlist the help of Kristen and her expertise to help us write the bylaws.
Nice. I work with her, she's
Sure. Yeah.
so.
Okay, any other new business?
Question for Howard, when's the mayor or the city council make appointments for boards and commissions?
June,
So you
probably
don't know
late,
yet.
it probably typically the way they operate late. June.
Right.
But all
All
the,
this conversation about me could implicate you as well.
that's true, because that's the 3-year
We didn't
appointment.
assume.
That's right.
I'll get it done before the country's fair.
Yeah, but I mean, that's their timeline. All boards and commissions, new
Yeah.
positions start July 1, so the council has to make those
Has
appointments.
to get their budget done first and then worry about that.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay, so we don't know yet.
we don't know yet.
Ask for the.
Wish I could say the same. All right, business, no more? No. Motion to adjourn,
I move we adjourn.
done
Thank you.
at 14:04.
What was your budget this
We're
year?
gonna pause it.
It is. got like a $10 million.
Yes.
Actually,